Olivier, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. You've been super helpful to me this year, so I very much appreciate that. It's been a crazy year for everybody. Why don't you take a quick second to just kind of tell folks a little bit about your background and then what you're doing right now? I know you're doing a lot of fractional CRO work for B2B SaaS companies.
Well, it's good to see you, and thanks for having me on the pod. We go way back. I remember working with you during my days at G2. So I am started out my own business about a month ago, and looking to ramp that up. And basically, I partner with companies where I help them get everything in order to be ready to scale. So typically, I'm working with companies that have found product market fit or are close to it, and so more like Series A companies. And then the plan is to really help them figure out, what are the levers that they can essentially leverage in order to create repeatable sales process that can lead to growth. And so historically, I've worked at G2 for 4 years, took the company from 1 to around 50 million ARR. Was also at Metadata after that, where I was president, helping on the go-to-market side. And we had a really good run there over 3 years. And before that, I was at FlipTop, which got acquired by LinkedIn.
Yep.
Spent some time at Glassdoor in the early days. And so I've been very fortunate to pick wonderful companies, and I've really enjoyed the runs.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in a little bit into product market fit, right? So, you'd mentioned that you work with, founders and organizations that have typically found product market fit. What tips would you give founders around A, finding product market fit, and then B, as you're looking at these organizations and you're kind of assessing, how you would come in and help, how do you know they have product market fit?
Yeah. So it's pretty hard to find out when you have product market fit. It's usually easier if you're looking back and be like, oh, that's, when we essentially found product market fit. But, typically a company will have a couple $1 million in ARR at that point. So usually it's companies that are around their, Series A. I've closed it recently or about to close it. And that's when you need customers that, are not friends and family, and customers that, find the organization via either they've been targeted through marketing campaigns, or the company's doing content and they're generating really insightful content. So people start following the company, and then eventually they're like, decide to give the product a try, or even just, listen to have a conversation with a sales team member. And so product market fit, again, is easier when you look back, but usually it's around, a few $1 million in revenue, and you're able to bring in customers at a reasonable customer acquisition cost, and those customers are renewing. The renewal rates are very, important here. And so you want to get, net retention rate, which is essentially a metric which will calculate, let's say that you have $1 from a customer today, on the renewal, they'll give you $1.20 or $1.40. If you can have a net retention rate in the 120 to 150 range, then, that's typically really good and best in class. And that's going to help you, get a really good multiple on your round of funding. And so those are some of the metrics that I would be looking at to figure out if, we are close to getting to product market fit.
Interesting. A couple of things that come to mind here. Is it more important to have like higher margins around that several $1 million mark, or is it more important to seeing those renewals, right, and that retention? Let's say, let's just say that you're at that Series A or about to be Series A mark as an indicator, right?
Yeah, it depends on what the category of the business is. And it depends as well. So if you're trying to build a new category and there's a handful of vendors and, there's no clear leader, I think it's, if you want to win the space, then you'll have to take some risk. And so your margins should not be as important. But if you are in a space that doesn't have many competitors, then at that point, you can be more careful about how you invest in your business. So I think that's going to depend there. And is it a B2B company? Is it a B2C companies? I think, that's also going to, your decision is going to how you make a decision on that will matter. So that's a hard question to answer
Yeah.
overall. But those are the things I would keep in mind.
Now, you talk about the signals when you come in that indicate, okay, they're ready to scale. I can now take them to that next level. Any sort of like, you talked about retention and those sorts of things, renewals, and within the B2B, SaaS context, any like signals that maybe founders could identify to say, you know what, outside of hitting those revenue marks and those pieces that you mentioned, this is the time to start to scale. This is the time to start to invest in that growth.
Yeah. So I would look at how many, reps at the company are selling the product right now. How many of those reps are hitting quota? And before you start deciding, like, all right, it's time to scale. And I've seen a lot of companies make this mistake, right? They're raising money from a VC, and they get in the old days they get a good multiple on it, and they're like, all right, we're just going to throw bodies at it, and throwing bodies at the problem is not the best way to go. One of the things I think is really important is to evaluate how much of the pipeline is being generated by the business is coming from marketing, and how much is coming from the sales reps. And I think, a good ratio is that, you want 50, to 70% of the pipeline to come from marketing. And that shows that you can essentially, do those tactics to drive, more pipeline. There will be a plateau at some point though. And so that's one of the things that's really critical here is that, you just can't go ahead and triple the sales team and expect all of them to, self-generate their pipeline, because one is going to take months for these reps to be enabled. So you're going to have to, pay for, 10 reps times, 3 months before they're trained to be able to do the outbound. And then if your sales cycle is 3, to 6 months, which is pretty typical, then you're like investing, 9 months into the life of a rep before you figure out if they can do the job. And so that's very, very they're very costly to do that. And so one of the things is how much of the pipeline is being generated by the marketing team, and how much does the marketing team think they can increase that? And then you should think as a CEO that 50% of the pipeline should be generated by marketing, and then the rest of it can be generated by the rep. And this is for a typical sales motion. Now, there are also PLG companies out there, and PLG is a super hot topic right now, and that is going to be a little bit different, right? So you're going to need to have the majority of the revenue generated by the marketing team, and then sales will be introduced at some point when there's renewals that are coming up, or if you're trying to upsell, and that's when like account managers get hired. And their motion is to essentially build relationships and then increase the usage of the product across all of the different teams in the company.
There's a couple of things you've said here today so far that really sort of like map me back to the past, right? Like I remember certain things, like organizations that I worked for that were creating a new category. They raised a lot of money. They had great founder level sales, and they were able to acquire a lot of net new, but then retention, 12 months later, or even before that, right? There were cases I remember where, customers just quit, even though they were in 12-month contracts, they just quit using it. So you just knew that they were going to churn, right? And so that, that was sort of a false positive around product market fit, right? And so to your point, also, the piece of like marketing really driving a lot of that pipeline also tells me that the category is a little more mature, right? People are actually out there looking for this, solution or have this problem, as opposed to, really great salespeople. I know some phenomenal salespeople that could sell ice to Eskimos, but then, that retention. So that really stands out a lot, like those false positives.
Yeah. Retention, not just, what is your gross retention rate, GRR, but NRR is specifically what is most important. And as any CEO, before they start, make that decision to invest in the business to scale, they need to have something that people, want to renew. And if your, GRR or NRR is not in the, 120 plus range, it probably doesn't make sense to start hiring a bunch of salespeople. I would go fix the product and make it stickier. And once that's solved, then you can look at investing more in marketing, and then over time, adding sales reps. But you need to ensure that, when you hire a rep, they have the ability to be successful. And I've seen tons of companies, just decide based on spreadsheets and the valuation of the company that, oh, well, we're going to go from, 3 to 9 million ARR this year. And for that to happen, we're going to double the size of the team. What you're going to see is that your conversion rates are going to get weaker over time, and your reps aren't going to be able to be successful. And that is very costly. There's, hiring, doubling your sales team is one of the most expensive thing that you can do for your business. And so you got to make sure that your product is, something that people like to engage with and want to renew.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the role of the CRO. I've only been in the game for, I don't know, in startups for about 22 years or so. And I remember early on, I just date myself because I don't look 42. That's why, but I remember, the CRO wasn't a thing. It was just VP of sales. And it seemed like when these tech stacks started to be built and there was all this cross-functional collaboration and data that needed to, I sounded silly saying I've been 22 years, and I guess that is a long time. But it doesn't.
That is a long time. Yeah, you're a dinosaur in the space.
Yeah. I look like I'm 18. I'm looking at myself on the screen. I'm like, you're not 42, man. But it's funny because I started to see the CRO, and I started to ask myself, what is it that's causing this new role to emerge? And it seemed to be like, yeah, that cross-functional collaboration, the data that needed to be actually synced between the alignment of these organizations. And then it just seemed like, boy, there's got to be someone who's like the, in the center that's sort of, making decisions across these various functions. And so, from your perspective, and I know you offer this to folks out there and you've done this work, what is the role from your POV of the CRO? And, frankly, when is the right time to bring a CRO on?
The good time to bring a CRO is typically around a Series B. And before that, I don't think it makes sense because the team is not large enough. And, the responsibilities of a CRO are going to be tied to revenue. And so you're thinking net new sales, you're thinking renewals, customer success or account managers, customer support, partnerships, which is having a big year this year, but trying to figure out how you can drive revenue from your partner ecosystem, I think is critical. That should roll up to the CRO, and then enablement, which becomes really important once you start having 50, 100 plus reps to ensure that they can do this really well. And then RevOps, revenue operations. And so that is just basically understanding the data through all the systems. And that is really, really important. And in some cases, I see RevOps rolling up to CEOs, but at the end of the day, they're going to work extremely well with the CRO because they're going to be making decisions based on the strategy of the business, based on the reporting that they find. And so I would think that companies should hire a really good RevOps person before they hire a CRO. And I see oftentimes that companies think that they need a CRO with Series A and like 5 reps, but I think at that point you just need a sales leader, a VP of sales or director of sales, whatever the background of the individual is. And I am seeing more and more companies now leverage outsource CROs, fractional CMOs, because they want the experience of people who've been there and have been very successful. But there's massive risk involved, right? There's risk for the business because these people tend to be really expensive, require a lot of equity. And on the flip side, most companies don't tend to make it. And so it's very risky for somebody who has a good track record to come in early stage company as a CRO when really they're essentially just a VP of sales, and they should be selling their own deals, trying to figure out what is the messaging that should be used, what is what kind of playbook should be creating for the reps. So I'm not a big fan of hiring CRO in early stage company, but I am a big fan of partnering with fractional CROs or CMOs that have done it before, because if you work with them 2, 5, 10 hours a week, you can get valuable insights there at a fraction of the cost. And I think that's safer way to build a business.
Yeah, maybe we can unpack that a little bit. I was actually going to ask you, what are the benefits of working with a fractional CRO, and what are the best ways to kind of engage them? You talked about, handful of hours, folks who have done it before. It sounds like highly strategic, highly leveraged time. But any other sort of tips you would give folks out there, founders who are starting to think about, okay, you know what, maybe I need to start to bring in a CRO, but we're still a little early and we want to kind of phase into it and frankly learn from maybe a fractional individual?
Well, I think it makes sense for CEOs to build a network and build relationships, because anytime you get on the phone with somebody that has been a CRO at a successful company, the CEO is probably going to learn a few things on that call. And so I think that is important, so that they can learn to up level and address certain business needs that are popping up. When I start working with a customer, my job is essentially just, I go in, I don't know much about the business, and then I'm going to have conversations with everybody across the different teams. I'm going to find out, from them what's going well, what's not going well, and then I'm going to basically build a list of things that I think the business needs to start thinking about, and then I will share these with the CEO, and then the CEO will give me some we'll align on which projects to start focusing on. In some cases, a lot of companies don't have a repeatable sales process. They've never spent time creating playbooks, ensuring that the reps are running calls very, in a similar fashion. Oftentimes, you'll notice that some reps will run their sales process completely different than other reps. There might not be alignment on pricing or discounting rules, and so typically the first thing that I'll work on with the team will be to clearly align on the playbook. So here's how you run a discovery call. Here's how you run your demo. Here is how you run, a closing call. And then I think it's important for companies to record the calls of the sales reps as much as possible, and have somebody that has really good background in analyzing these calls to give one-on-one coaching, but then also make improvements to the playbooks to ensure that everyone is leveraging the same story and they're leveraging the same process, because that is usually the biggest gap that I see with early stage companies, is that people will be basically doing anything they want on their own, and there's no accountability at the end of the day.
Do you think that's exacerbated by the remote work environment? I know that's a big one. I got a lot of feedback there from myself, but yeah, do you think it's exacerbated, or were these issues like as prominent when folks were all in the sales pit?
Yeah, no, they weren't as prominent before. And so, my experience at G2, for example, there were 5 people in sales when I started there. By the time I left, there was 150. And I made a decision during my time there that I would only hire in San Francisco or Chicago. And that was a decision I made because I wanted people in the office. I wanted to learn from each other. Now, the type of persona that I was hiring there at G2 was pretty much, fairly inexperienced salespeople. So a lot of people that we hired started as BDRs, were promoted to, SMB reps, mid-market, enterprise, so on and so forth. And by having them in the office, you can easily, overhear them when they're having conversations with other reps. And it's easy if you are looking at hiring inexperienced salespeople, it's better to have them in person because you can coach them. It's really hard for them to learn all about the business, by watching other people's calls, and then they're going to develop, some habits, and some of them might not be great, and it might take you time to realize, that they're making mistakes, because if everyone's remote, then somebody's got to watch all of these, demos and recorded calls, and that is super time consuming. And so, this is one of the reasons why I think, outsourcing this work in the early days to, a fractional CRO that can evaluate the calls and then give feedback and then, create playbooks is going to be very advantageous to the business.
Awesome. Well, it's been a tough 1 or 2 years now in SaaS, for sure. A lot of people are struggling and continue to struggle. I spoke to a buddy of mine, one of my old co-founders of a company I started years ago, and he has a very successful GTM tech company that we both know, and he's a co-founder, CTO, and he was just telling me, he's like, bro, I just had to stop drinking because I found myself drinking all the time because we've had to fire multiple people. We've gone through multiple rifts. People are suing us. Like, people are like mental health crises because of this stuff, things like that. And so it's been a very, very tough. And I think it's been tough for a lot of reasons. If you were to think about the tips, or maybe some key tips that you would give CEOs and of course, like, go to market leaders around how to approach these very challenging times, right? Because again, it's not just, oh, we're not hitting our numbers and that's it, at this one organization. It's just such a macro environment that has multiple layers to it.
Yeah, and culture is a main component to the success of a company. And anytime a company goes from, having culture in person to then being remote and then having, multiple rounds of layoffs, it's really hard to rebuild that culture. And so one of the things that, I recommend is that, if the company is remote, and a lot of companies now are especially early stage companies are moving there, it's to do on-sites once a quarter. Like, get the entire company or as many individuals in the company together as possible. And the point of the on-site is to celebrate the wins, is to talk about the future. Here's where we're headed. And then it's to have some fun together. And I've seen some companies do extremely well, even though they're fully remote, because they have these quarterly on-sites where people get to, build relationships, friendships, have fun together, celebrate the wins. Celebrating wins is something that I often see is overlooked by CEOs. Building a startup is really difficult, and having fun at work is kind of important, because we spend a lot of our time there, and it's the CEO, it's the business is their life, but the employees oftentimes it's just part of their life. And so giving recognition and trying to build a culture that is empathetic and that rewards hard work but is also fun, I think is going to be one of the most important things that they can invest in, especially in the early days.
Yeah.
And nothing beats time in person, but the cost analysis of building a remote company is pretty good. Right. So you're saving on office space. You can have top tier talent regardless of where they're located in the world. And that is, pretty appealing for, a lot of CEOs. But again, you need time in the office together, or at, selected locations that vary from quarter to quarter, where people can, essentially enjoy being in the presence of their colleagues.
Awesome. Olivier, thank you so much for, just being on the show and bestowing your wisdom. If folks wanted to, follow you on social media, or maybe there's some founders out there who are listening who are interested in maybe hiring you for fractional revenue services, what are the best channels to reach you?
Yeah, I'm LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me, and there's no other Olivier Labbés in tech in the US that have my name. So pretty easy to find. And I specialize in companies that are B2B focused in early stage.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And have a wonderful day. I got to come out to Colorado and have a beer with you.
I would love that. I would love to host you in Boulder or Denver anytime you come this way. And thanks for having me on the pod. It's really good to catch up.
Yeah, well, Dion is making a lot of noise out there, right? And now,
He
so
is.
we'll see if
Yeah.
that continues. It looks pretty cool.
All right. Thanks, sir.
All right,
Chat
thank
soon.
you.